Welcome back to Strange Form. In part 1 of our Michael Keaton Batman journey, today, at your request, we will be looking at MEZCO'S 1/12th Collective 1989 Batman. I am mostly a 1/6 and 1/4 scale collector, and though I have bought a few of these over the years for both myself and my daughter, I am out of the Mezco loop and was shocked to see how scarce this figure became in such a short order. Both the alien and the white alien variant are still quite easy to find, and at less than I paid for them. But this figure not only sold out at most major retailers, but was also marked way up just about everywhere that it could be found. But fortunately, I was able to procure a brand new one at the base retail price, though that was no easy task. The package is a simple gold and black design, which is very reminiscent of the old Toy Biz figures, all of which I had as a child, so this is definitely nostalgic to anyone watching this who didn't experience Batman Mania in 1989. The 1989 release was about as big as Star Wars in terms of marketing and merchandise. There is not one place you could go where there wasn't Batman something, and it had good competition that year with Ghostbusters 2 and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. With a tentpole film being released just about every couple of months these days, you definitely don't see a single film dominate the culture the way this one did, and I think this goes a long way towards the collectability of anything Tim Burton Batman. Though slightly smaller, the packaging is very similar to the alien figures, except with a clear plastic tray instead of black. The sheer amount of tiny accessories that are not taped down in any way make opening this package a bit nerve-wracking, as everything here wants to fly out into the night, never to be seen again. At my count, there are 29 items in the box, which includes multiple portraits, 4 to be precise, even though most websites actually only quote 3. And I'll tell you what my positive and negative first snap impressions are. In the positive category, the portraits are incredible, especially for the size. Both the cowl and the face are in correct proportion to one another, and they don't feel plasticky or cheap, i.e. sharp ears instead of nubs. I'm looking at you, McFarlane. But on the negative, both the body and belt lack any sharp detail due to lack of any sort of paint scheme or washes, and the rubber body has a sort of gray, ashy look and appears to be coated in some sort of fine powder, which I'm assuming is left over from removing it from the mold. The problem I have here is that Mezco doesn't provide the exact composition of the rubber they use, so it's difficult to know for sure how to clean and maintain this product without damaging it. I'm beginning to think that some of these collectibles should have an ingredient list, sort of like food product. On top of the multitude of tiny accessories, the figure also comes with 2 separate capes, one with bendy wire inserts and the other without. Unfortunately, the capes affixed to the figure with a frustrating gimmick involving an ill-fitting flange and magnets, which will have your Keaton heads flying off every time you go to adjust that cape, but more on that in a minute. As for all the many accessories, there is one that I had trouble placing, which is Batman's time bomb. I cannot remember seeing this in the film, but I do remember it being part of the Batman card set, and it appears to be an important enough accessory to add to just about every single Batman released over the last several years. But everything else is fairly straightforward, and what you would expect to come with Batman. We have the spear tip for the grappling gun, 4 separate batarangs, 1 smoke capsule, and the voice-activated remote that Batman uses to both shield the Batmobile and call it back to him and Vicky Vale after they make their escape. For such tiny, tiny pieces, these are spectacularly accurate to the original props that are difficult for even the most detail-oriented cosplayer to hunt down reference material on. Also, we have Batman's wonderful toy, which we are unsure where he got, the zipline gun, and of course his classic grappling hook gun, which you can insert the spear tip into, in both open and closed positions. Here we have the fired grappling spear that comes attached to an adjustable bendy wire with a small plug to insert into the grappling gun, as well as the batarang on a bendy wire grappling line. And lastly, we have 1 throwing star with the many bat hands. These are beyond tiny, so to have so much detail is incredible. There are wrinkles and stitches, as well as painted studded palms, and I'm serious about that detail. Here, all of these were shot with a 90mm 1.1 macro, and without that magnification, it would be difficult to even know they had put some of these details into the costume. So kudos for that, Mezco, going above and beyond for the nearsighted. The The same is true with the alternate heads. The two slightly open mouth versions actually have sculpted teeth, and each face has textured and slightly modeled skin. And the battle damaged face has extra damage molded into the cowl as well as the scar. My only issue here is that the one with the movable eyes. It's a cool concept, but mine has the pupils painted in cross-eyed position. And not just that, but one with the pupil positioned towards the top eyelid and the other with it positioned towards the bottom eyelid. And it's not something that can be easily fixed without repainting them. Fortunately, beyond that, the portraits are all fairly film accurate. Which brings me to one of my major detractors. Inside of the neck, there's a magnet, and around the magnet there is a rigid ring that the flange the cape is sewn into is supposed to be placed over to lock into place, allowing you to then attach the head. The problem is that the rigid neck piece is attached to the soft rubber, which makes it very difficult to affix the cape to, especially considering the fact that they overstitched the fabric on the cape. So to place that stupid plastic ring over the collar, you have a bunch of material obscuring a proper fit, which is disappointing because if you put the cape inside out, it actually clicks into place more easily, which is something they should have caught before sending it out. So, most of the time, it's only the two magnets that are holding the cape in place, which works well unless you want to have the cape in any sort of dynamic pose, at which point a lot of finessing and patience become mandatory, as well as copious amounts of swearing. As for the non-bendy wire cape, unfortunately its neutral position is flared outward, which is strange, as they simply could have just added a cape that was tailored into a drape position, as two flared capes aren't really necessary, and the only quick solution I could come up with was a tiny binder clip. In the long term, I think that if I'm going to display this, I'm probably going to glue some small magnets into the cape, allowing for more inconspicuous posing, especially considering that the figure's ankles aren't terribly tight, in that just the addition of the paperclip's weight drags the figure backwards. Beyond those problems, when all the stars align, you can get the figure into some extremely film-accurate poses. And unlike the alien before it, the overall armature seems extremely rigid, almost to the point of causing me to be worried about breaking the joints as I pose him. So when manipulating the figure, remember, slowly work all of these joints into position, as I could see unrepairable calamity happening if you manhandle it too hard. And this brings me back to the rubber body. Unfortunately, I can't attest to the rubber being better or worse than anything we've seen in the past. It seems to be a different mixture than either of the alien figures, though, and I feel it's a little softer, more like silicone, meaning no matter the position I put it in, the rubber doesn't seem to stress anywhere, and is also molded into a fairly neutral feeling start position, so when posed, the rubber isn't pulling the armature in any direction. But unfortunately, time is going to be the biggest telltale as to whether this was a genius idea or not. One thing I wish they would have done is eliminate a lot of the bumpy texture. The real 89 suit did have some texture, but at distance it plays as smooth. And I think that the texture was put in so that the suit wouldn't constantly catch the lighting. But trying to recreate this at scale, that texture makes the figure look like it has whole body acne. And I wish I could say that this one is not going to be cracked, split, or a dried up mess in 6 months to a year, but honestly, I don't know. One thing that does seem obvious is that the rubber formula seems to be different with each successive body that they make, which makes you wonder if this is something that Mezco is trying to perfect. There are a lot of aspects of this figure that are actually done really well. Here you see the entire weight of the figure is being held up by the tiny batarang wire, the end of which is simply hooked into the overhead light. The wire cape is definitely the more functional of the two, allowing for quite a few different dynamic options. But unfortunately, they only put wire in every other seam. This is easily rectified by going to Hobby Lobby and buying your own thin gauge wire and running it up the remaining seams yourself, which fortunately are open-ended to make this an easy task, but I don't understand why they didn't just do it themselves. It would have been 8 tiny wires rather than 4, and I can't see this omission cutting the cost too terribly much. Now you may notice, over this entire montage, the body is getting darker and less powdery looking. That's because I took a microfiber cloth and went over the entire thing with a small amount of warm water. I may opt to seal the whole thing in Mod Podge, similar to the way I have other rubber figures. But in all honesty, I kind of want to see how this one holds up without any extra work. Though there are issues with this figure, I would say that this one nicely hits exactly what Mezco has set out to do. become the intermediate between entry-level collectibles and high-end collectibles, a sort of Hot Toys light, if you will. I would say that the three most notable companies currently cornering these levels of the market are Hiya Toys, giving fair quality at an affordable price in a compact 1/18th scale. MEZCO in the middle of both price and size, offering 1/6 style figures and accessories at half the size and 1/3 the standard price. And lastly, Hot Toys, whose prices unfortunately are starting to outpace their worth. So it's not hard to see why MEZCO'S 1/12th collective line has exploded in popularity over the last couple years. They are definitely the fallback position for collectors priced out of the 1/6 scale market, or who have more limited space. And here's where I think MEZCO deserves a bit of praise, in that for the most part, they are definitely trying to cater to their corner of the market. The figures are innovative, fairly well built, and usually come with a cornucopia of accessories. But I'm also noticing them begin to slowly turn up the heat when it comes to price. And the second they get too big for their britches and start releasing figures regularly at $150 to $230, I think that the market they serve will definitely turn on them. If the price for this particular figure was any higher, I would probably find most of the issues untenable. But for right now, this is a fine entry at a price that buys a certain amount of forgiveness. And lastly, I'm impressed with the fact that MEZCO'S alien figures are in proper proportion to the other 1/12th offerings, and though I had issues with both the rubber and armature of the alien figures, this '89 Batman looks and feels like a more refined use of these materials and design aspects, especially considering that there is no paint to rub off, as was an issue with the big chap, and though Batman's armature seems to be identical to the aliens, the joints definitely feel more torqued down, but again, only time will tell. So here's to hoping MEZCO'S '89 Batman will earn its hard-to-find popularity in the years to come. I hope you enjoyed this episode and will join us next week in our continued journey down Michael Keaton Batman memory lane. And if you haven't already, consider becoming a part of our community by subscribing, liking, sharing, and getting involved in the comments section. At the upload of this video, we are only 50 subscribers away from being 1,000 strong. And remember, never stop collecting.